I don't typically read the resume for the guests that I introduce, but this one is so darn good, I have to share it with you. So I have the pleasure of introducing Ray Perryman. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Perryman. He is the president and CEO of the Perryman Group, an economic research and analysis firm out of Waco, Texas. He holds a BS in mathematics from Baylor University and a PhD in economics from Rice University. Now, Ray says he always felt that the BS would have been somehow more appropriate for economics and has spent his entire life trying to prove that. It's funny, right? He took his first economics course on a coin flip between economics and psychology, and if it had gone the other way, there might be some really messed up people in this world. Those are his words. Dr. Perryman has held numerous academic positions in his career, including 10 years as a Herman Brown Professor of Economics and 5 years as a university professor and economist in residence at Baylor, as well as 5 years as business economist in residence at Southern Methodist University. He has authored several books and more than 400 academic papers. He lives in Odessa and works in Waco. He is the father to 5 young Texans, although some of them are temporarily living somewhere else, and the grandfather to 4. Here's some fun facts about Dr. Perryman. He gets lost on his own block. He lives on a circle. It's true. He once hit one of his cars into the other car. His current academic role is as senior fellow at the IC Squared Institute at the University of Texas. In the professional arena, Dr. Perryman has authored more than 2,500 trade articles. He publishes a subscription forecasting service and a monthly newsletter, writes a weekly syndicated column, and is on national public radio. His firm engages in a broad range of complex projects for major corporate and government interests and has served the needs of more than 2,500 clients, including over half of the Fortune 100, 2/3 of Global 25, and the 12 largest tech firms in the country. This is pretty awesome. Dr. Perryman has been nominated for the Nobel Prize in Economics. He has been called a genius by the Wall Street Journal, a world-class scholar by Business Week, the unofficial state economist by the New York Times, and the most quoted man in Texas by Texas Monthly. But this is his personal favorite, the state's premier barbecue connoisseur by the Dallas Morning News. What his wife calls him cannot be mentioned in mixed company. She's here, I bet that's true. He calls me world peace, I call him save the world. We call him a friend. Please welcome Dr. Ray Perryman.
Well, thank you very much, Tatum, I think. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight and to spend a few moments sharing this very, very exciting new initiative for our region and for the community of Midland and a lot of the great things that are going on right now. Tatum mentioned my lovely wife, Lorraine, who is here, who's also a former news anchor and is here tonight and who does a lot of wonderful things here in the basin. I was feeling kind of full of myself today, and so I said to Lorraine, I was fishing for a compliment, and so I said, listen, can you believe, would you have ever thought in your wildest dreams that I get to come out here to Wagner Well and participate in this great event with one of the great American heroes of recent times, Genome McChrystal? In your wildest dreams, did you ever think that? And she said to me, she says, Ray, I don't know how to tell you this, but you're not in my wildest dreams. So just want you to know the respect I get at home. But you've already heard about some of it. But anyway, it's a real pleasure to be here. And as I say, I want to try to give you a few minutes here of kind of some of the history and the future and some things we see going on right now and why this initiative is so very, very important right now to the entire region and to this community. You know, I'm a person an amateur historian. I think about history a lot, and it occurs to me that about probably 90 years or so from now, whoever the best historians are at the time will be looking back on this first century of the third millennium, and they'll be writing about all the major things that happened. And when they get back to the early years of this century, I think there's at least 3 things they're going to write about that I can think about. They will write about 9/11, obviously. And it totally changed the way we have to go about dealing with military engagements. And of course, General McChrystal was an iconic person in doing that sort of thing. It changed our perception of risk. It changed many aspects of our daily lives, our behaviors. It was a major force. A second one I think they'll write about that also occurred in 2001 is the mapping of the human genome, because that's going to radically affect the way we receive our health care and our quality of life over the coming decades. And so I think they'll write about that one. I also think, though, they're going to write about another one. And as far as I'm concerned, it's by far the biggest thing that's happened economically in the first 20 years of this century. And I have no idea what's in second place, because whatever it is a long way behind. And that is the absolute, complete, total transformation of the energy industry from where it was to where it is in this period of time. And obviously right here in this area, we're in the epicenter of that. And I want to try to give you some perspective about that for just a few minutes here. I'll start out back in history a while. For the last, 35 million years or so of the Paleozoic era, things aligned just right to create what we now call the Permian Basin, or as Tatum said, just the Permian these days. After that, not much happened for about 230 million years. Some tectonic plates moved around a little bit, but I mean, nobody tweeted about it. I mean, it was pretty dull for about 230 million years. And then, around 1920, something happened. They discovered oil in Mitchell County at the Abrams well, first well in the Permian Basin, and let us know there was some oil out here. 3 years later, there's one that's much more famous, Santa Rita number 1, that helped to build the University of Texas' wonderful endowment, and also made it known that there's a pretty big oil field here. And over time, we figured out it was a really big oil field. For years, we thought it was one of the biggest in the country. By the time all said and done, I think it may well be the largest oil-producing area in the world before we're done here. We're literally to that point in time. And so, a lot of things happened in between. Oil production gradually picked up. I'm going to fast forward now. I'm doing pretty well here, man. In a couple of minutes, I've gone from 230 million years ago to 1973, okay? And I'm going to start at 1973. Now, any of you who are around this area know what happened in 1973. We had the Arab oil embargo. We had the OPEC production cuts. And the price of oil that had been around $3 a barrel for a long time, over the next 8 years, went up 1,200%. And obviously that's an era that virtually everyone in this country calls the energy crisis. It's an era that out here we call the oil boom. It's the same thing, just a matter of perspective. Makes a big difference whether you're buying or selling. What can I say? And obviously it was a very good time here, and rigs were running, and everybody was prosperous. It was a great time out here. But I want to talk about something that was happening behind the scenes that nobody paid much attention to. In 1973, the Permian Basin produced 2.2 million barrels a day of oil. That was the most we'd ever done in 1973. And you would think, man, that next 8 years when the price was soaring, we'd have produced a lot more, because we had hundreds of rigs running all the time. We were getting everything we could get out. But you know what? Production went down every year. And it kept going down in the bust. And it kept going down after the bust. And for 35 years, every year from 1973 to 2008, energy production went down in the Permian Basin. By the time we got to 2008, we were producing 710 million barrels a day. Now keep in mind, we've been producing 2.2 million. We'd lost 2/3 of our oil production in 35 years. There were commentators at the time that were saying that when you flew over Midland those days and you saw those pump jacks that weren't pumping in those drill sites, that they resembled the tombstones in a petroleum graveyard. We have run some simulations that said, what if we kept drilling the same way, in the same places, in the same manner after that? And if we had done that today, we would be producing 460 million barrels a day. And by 2025, we'd be producing 460,000 barrels a day. And by 2025, 300,000 barrels a day. Keep that number in mind for just a second. 2025, 300 barrels a day. That's what we would have done if things had gone on the way that we thought they would. The pipelines that used to bring oil from the Permian Basin to the Gulf Coast were turned around to bring gasoline from the Gulf Coast to the Permian Basin. The refineries retooled to handle the heavier crudes from other places because they didn't think they were going to get much from here anymore. I mean, it was being written off. But something happened in 2008. Things turned around. There became a different way to get oil out of the ground. And by 2016, we had broken that record, which set the 35 years back in 1973. By 2016, just 8 years after we started drilling again, we had shattered that record. Today, it's 3.5 million barrel of oil equivalents right now. It's up 50% since 2016. We think, 10 or 12 other people who forecast think that by 2025, it's likely to be somewhere around 6 million barrels a day. Now, let's think about that. If things had kept going like they were, it would be 300,000 barrels a day in 2025. It's likely going to be 6 million barrels a day. That's 20 times as much. That is revolutionary, and it has huge implications for the entire world. Let's go back and talk about the United States for a minute. In 1973, when the embargo started, the United States consumed 31% of the world's oil. That's a lot. We were producing about 60% of what we consumed and importing about 40%. But then we hit what was a very common topic in speeches I would give even 10 years ago, something called peak oil. The amount of oil produced every year started going down, and it's the same thing started happening in the United States. It was happening out here. And by the time we got to 2008, despite the fact we had brought the North Slope on in Alaska in between, which was a very big production area, despite that, we were down to only producing 36% of what we consumed. We had to import almost 2/3 of the oil that we consumed. And we were vulnerable because a lot of that oil had to come from places that didn't particularly like us. This was not a great situation for us in any way. And it seemed like a fairly desperate situation as it looked like we were continuing to run out of oil and continuing to run out of oil. And basically, you had major companies who were spending literally billions of dollars on the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic Coast to build huge facilities in order to import compressed and liquefied natural gas so we'd have enough energy to operate on. I mean, that was the situation we were in. In 2008, we're talking a decade ago, that's the situation we were in. Then things turned around. Today, we are producing 72.5% of the oil that we consume. Not 36%, we have doubled that market share. We were only producing 8.1% of the oil in the world in 2008. Today it's about 15 or 16%. We're no longer using that 31% that we did in 73 or the 22.5 that we did in 08. It's about 20% now. So we're basically producing 15%, consuming 20%. Now we'll probably continue to have a deficit like that. We'll continue to export a little bit of oil, a little bit of crude, import a little bit of crude because with Canada and Mexico situated where they are with some of the refining capacity, it just makes sense to bring some of it in from those places. But in terms of total petroleum, that is when you include the refined products, the LNG, the petroleum liquids, and the petrochemicals and all that, a funny thing happened. Every year about this time of the year, the Energy Information Administration in D.C. publishes the annual Energy Outlook. And it's a thing that everybody wants to grab and read when it comes out. In 2017, 2 years ago, they told us, you know what? By 2026, we're going to be a net exporter of all petroleum products. And that was an amazing statement in 2017. Then they issued the one last year, about this time last year. They said, you know what? In 2022, we're going to be a net exporter of all petroleum products. And then they just released a week or so ago the new one. And guess what they said? In 2020, we're going to be a net exporter of all petroleum products. This is happening very fast. It's happening faster than the analysts can keep up with in terms of what's going on here. We are now the #1 oil-producing country in the world. That was inconceivable 10 years ago. And it's all because of what's going on right here. There's no other fields that come remotely close to that. So it is an amazing, remarkable thing that's happened. I mentioned that in 2008, we had these big companies, the smartest people in the industry, spending billions of dollars to build huge facilities to import liquefied natural gas. Those same companies on those same pieces of land are now investing billions of dollars in order to export liquefied natural gas. That's a complete 180 in the entire structure of the global energy economy in 10 years. And I'm very grateful because my company got to get the permits for both of them, so I like that. I like the fact that they changed their minds. But it's truly something that it's almost impossible to conceive how important and how significant this is. And we have to ask ourselves, why? Well, the obvious answer is hydraulic fracturing. The way a geologist friend of mine explained it to me was one time that I could understand. He said, Ray, back when they drilled the first oil well in Titusville, Pennsylvania in 1859, Lorraine and I have actually been to that well site. They found oil at 69.5 feet, by the way. From that day until very recently, what we tried to do was get that oil that seeped out of those dense, thick rocks over that 230 million years that we weren't getting much attention and pooled up somewhere. We tried to go find that oil and go get it. Then we figured out we could get inside the rocks and we could get the oil out of the rocks. And that totally changed the concept of things. And that was very important. But that was one thing that had to happen. That alone wouldn't have done it. Okay? It took at least 5 other things that I want to talk about very quickly here. One of them was that there had to be global demand for this oil. In other words, someone had to need the oil. And that had not always been the case. The global economy has exploded in the last few years. Even with it kind of slowing down a little bit in the last year or so, it's going to grow about 3.5 or 4%, of which 75% plus of that growth is going to come in the emerging economies of the world. Not in the United States, not in Europe, not in Japan, but in the emerging part of the world. Now, why that's important is that's the area of the world that's starting to manufacture, that historically has been agrarian or based on minerals. They're starting to make things now. When you make things, you use more energy. They're going to need a huge amount of energy. In the next quarter century, this country or this world is going to need all the energy we use now, Xerox it and put another set up there. We're going to need twice what we need now in the next 25 years. We'll get some of it from renewables. We'll get some of it from all kinds of different places, but we have to get it from hydrocarbons. That's the only thing we have. We have to get it a little cleaner than we get it now, both getting it out of the ground and burning it. We have to do some other things to make it better, but we absolutely have no other place to get the energy to fuel the world other than hydrocarbons. And every molecule that we're going to take out of here in this situation, make no mistake about it, every molecule we take out of here is going to be exported, okay? Now, that was one thing that had to happen. Another thing that had to happen, exporting itself. We had to figure out different ways to export beyond what we've done before. And we're seeing that happen now. One of them I mentioned was we can now compress and liquefy natural gas. And so it's no longer just a domestic market. We can ship natural gas all over the world to places that don't have it. And believe me, they'll pay very dearly for it if they don't have it. The other one, of course, is in 2015, we finally got rid of the ban on crude oil exports. So we can now ship crude directly out of the country. So all of these things are happening. And then the other one was discoveries. Because once we figured out you could get it out of the rocks, the next thing we found out is we have a whole lot of rocks here. Literally, we found layer after layer after layer below where we gotten oil before and found these huge reserves that are in the area. And we found new places where we didn't even know there was oil before because none of it ever had seeped out of the rocks, but it was down in those rocks. And we were able to find those because of new technologies and new techniques and new possibilities in drilling. In the century, next year will be a century that we've been drilling oil in the Permian Basin. If you take the oil and the gas and you convert it all to barrels, we've taken out something like 40 billion barrels of oil. The reserves we feel pretty confident about right now that are recoverable are about 3 times that. We don't measure our availability of oil today in years or decades like we had to do 10 years ago. We measured in centuries. It's an entirely different world than anything we've ever seen before. Okay, so those discoveries are a big part of it. The next thing that's happening is the infrastructure to make this happen. I mentioned those pipelines that were sent the other way back 10 years ago. They've reversed them now, and they're building billions of dollars and thousands of miles worth of new ones right now. They're building storage capacity on the Gulf Coast. They're building LNG capacity. They're widening and deepening the ports to get them ready to use the bigger vessels we can now get through the Panama Canal, and even on the outer islands, the huge vessels that come out of the Suez Canal that can handle 4 times as much oil in one shipment as we're able to do right now. All of these things are happening at once. So it's a huge thing that has a global significance, and it all starts and ends right here. And the final one that's happened, and frankly I think it's one of the most important ones, is we're getting the cost down. If you go back, let's go back, I keep going back to 2008. Let's go back to 2008 one more time. If you remember, the price of oil went way up in 2008, $125, $30 a barrel, got way up there, okay? And then it started falling very rapidly. But a funny thing happened. As the price started falling, the rig count kept going up. That's kind of weird. Until we hit 70, and then the rig count plummeted. You come over then to 2014, 2015, same thing, we get up to $100 a barrel or so. Price starts falling very dramatically. Rig count keeps going up until we get to 70, and then it plummets again. So what that tells me is that in 2008, in 2015, which was just barely 3.5 years ago, the break-even price for oil was about $70 on average. I mean, it varies by a lot of different factors that come into play. But on average, about $70 a barrel was the incremental cost of getting a barrel out and getting it to market where it made sense to do it. Today, that number's about 50. And we know that because we've seen it, once the price went down, as soon as it hit 50, it started accelerating again. 4 years ago, $70 was the breaking point. That was the brakes. Today, 50 is the accelerator. That is a dramatic difference in cost. And it's come about because of a number of things, using water more efficiently. It's come about because of smart drill bits with brains in them, artificial intelligence, digitization, all sorts of things we're doing now to bring technology to the oil industry. And all of that is very, very important. Well, what does it mean? That's the next question. Well, I think it means we're going to have less volatility in the future than we've had in the past. Not saying you won't drill more wells at 80 than you will at 50, so sure you will. But it's not going to be a huge number. You're going to continue to drill at 50. And the interesting thing is that cost pattern, best we can tell, is still going down. It hasn't plateaued at the bottom yet. So what does that mean? It means it's less volatile. It means larger companies are making very, very large lease agreements right now. They're leasing large, huge amounts of land. And they're developing drilling plans for decades that basically say, we want to drill about this many wells every year. And yeah, we may go up a little bit if the price is high. We go down a little bit if the price is low. But we're going to keep drilling. Okay? That has some profound implications for our area. It means instead of a workforce that lives in man camps and comes in and out every couple of weeks, which is very inefficient, lives in hotels, very inefficient, very expensive, is not optimal for the companies. Instead of that, we'll have a workforce that it makes sense for them to move here. And that means we need a workforce, and we need to train that workforce. And that includes not just the people out in the field, but the people who do the complex computer stuff that gets more and more complex every year in the oil and gas industry. It means the engineers, the geologists, all the technicians, everyone in the industry, that they're going to be here. We need to welcome them. We need to train them. That's going to bring a permanent population increase, which means housing, as the mayor was talking about. It means schools. It means healthcare facilities. It means local infrastructure. And it means amenities, like the great place we're in right now. It means quality of life, sporting events, cultural events, things that make it a desirable place to live. All of those things need to happen in order for us to fully capitalize on what's about to happen out here. Now, what about the opportunities? Obviously, we have the opportunity to be the epicenter, and we will be, of the industry and do some things to maximize that and make it better for the industry and better for everyone here. But it goes beyond that. We can become a fairly significant center in a lot of different areas in terms of technology, because energy technology is changing rapidly. There's no reason we can't be the center of that. Most of the intellectual property is out here right now. Water technology and using water efficiently is going to be accelerated right here. There's no reason that we can't be the epicenter of that. The environmental technology to help us get the stuff out of the ground more in a better way and burn it in a better way. There's no reason in the world that can't happen right here. We also happen to have, in addition to the oil we're blessed with and the gas we're blessed with, we have a lot of sunshine and we have a lot of wind. If you don't believe me, just walk outside right now. Those renewable resources. We can be a major center for that. We're one of the top producing areas for wind right now. There's no reason we can't be for solar. We've got some investments going on now. So we can do that as well, which is also all that plus all the technologies we're using. I mean, we're using artificial intelligence. We're using smart systems. We're using intelligent drill bits. We're using digitization. We're using all the technologies that are going into a lot of other things. All the applications of nanotechnology are happening in the oil patch right now. There's no reason, if we're a desirable place to live, that we can't have all that. And what it takes is everything I mentioned a moment ago. Housing, public schools, workforce training and workforce, healthcare, infrastructure, amenities and all that, and add one more word to it: excellent. Make yourself the place people want to come to. This is going to happen throughout the Permian Basin. A certain amount of it will obviously happen in Midland. It's the headquarters. A lot of companies are here. Midland County has a lot of oil and gas resources, but it's happening all over the Permian Basin, and the efforts all over the Permian Basin are very, very important to making this happen. But all of that is the opportunity that we have right now. Our company is just now embarking, in addition to the work we've done so far, on a major project to help really quantify some of these things. What do we need in the basin? What do we need in Midland to really do the things we need to do, so we can find the resources and that sort of thing. The final thing I want to talk about is choice. Okay, this opportunity brings choices for us. Basically, just two. We don't have one of them. One we might like to have, we don't have. Keeping things the way they are. That's not a choice. We don't get to do that. This is not your grandmother's oil boom we're talking about here. Okay? This is an entirely different animal with an entirely different trajectory to it. So we don't get to do that. So that is not an option. So we have two options. Option one, we can just kind of piddle around the edges and do a little stuff here and there, maybe get a little bit of housing, maybe do a little bit for the schools, and maybe a little bit here and there, not do too much. And we can see where we are in 2025. And I can pretty much tell you a lot of where we're going to be. We're not going to be a very good place to live because we're going to have shortages of all kinds of things. We're going to have crowding. We're going to have crowded schools. We're going to have crowded roads. We're going to have crowded water and sewer systems. We're going to have a lot of things that we don't like. And we're not going to be helping the industry maximize its potential because all those things raise the cost to the industry. So that's one choice. The other choice is what Priority Midland and a lot of the other initiatives around the region, the Permian Strategic Partners, the things going on in Odessa and Pecos and Andrews and everywhere else. All of these things are efforts to embrace this and try to use it to our advantage, try to magnify it, to try to make our region the bellwether of the economy that it can be. Those are the two choices that we have. I'm about 2 minutes over where they told me to be, but hey, I'm up here and you're right there, so what can I say? I'm going to close with just one very, very, very quick thought. The wisest man I ever met in my life was my maternal grandfather. And he taught me many, many things that have helped me throughout my life, and a lot of others would have helped me a lot more if I would have listened to him. But two of them in particular, or one of them in particular that I want to close with tonight. He once told me, he says, Ray, he says, there's two ways to get to the top of an oak tree. One is to climb it, and one is to sit on an acorn. Okay? Think about that for a minute, okay? This is a time to climb. It's a time for the public sector, the private sectors, the industry, the healthcare facilities, the schools, everyone else to get behind these initiatives, do the things we need to do to truly make the Permian Basin, Midland, all the other communities here what we can be. This is a globally significant opportunity. There's been nothing like it that I'm aware of in my lifetime, and I've been doing this a fairly long time now. I've never seen anything like it. It's an opportunity that we should capture and maximize and make this the greatest place on earth. Thank you very much.